Welcome to the American Citizens Abroad podcast. Today we are chatting with Carinne, a US-born and UK-based journalist. Welcome. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
What initially inspired you to move abroad? And can you tell us about your journey as an expat?
So I grew up with a mother who lived abroad, and she really instilled in us a childhood that was quite reflective of that, despite growing up in the States. And so I studied abroad in college as well in Lisbon, Portugal. And living abroad was definitely of interest, but I just don't think I ever really considered it because of the career path I chose to follow, which was medical school. But in 2020, my long-term partner, who was my fiance at the time, sent out a handful of fellowship applications, and they were all quite competitive. So we really didn't think too much of it at the time because the chances of winning were quite slim. But ultimately, he did end up winning something called the Marshall Scholarship, which sends about 40 to 50 US citizens over to the UK for 2 years, fully funded for graduate school. So not only was this a once in a lifetime opportunity for him, but I also kind of thought of it as this perfect in between for me, as I was able to defer my med school acceptance and join him for these 2 years to have a European adventure. So we moved from Raleigh, North Carolina to Edinburgh, Scotland in late 2021. And then we moved again to Cambridge, England in late 2022 for the second year, and spent the 2 years just having the time of our lives, traveling around Europe, meeting so many incredible people. But our plan all along was to return to the US after those 2 years, which is what we actually ended up doing. So in 2023, towards the end of the year, I started medical school. I realized very quickly on that this career that I had worked so hard to build was no longer fitting me or fulfilling me. It just felt like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And I think I just had changed so much over the 2 years abroad. My husband had too, and we just weren't happy being back in the US. And I think it really forced us to reevaluate a lot of things and make some major changes now that we knew what life across the pond was like for us. All that to say, I ended up leaving medical school in the US, and we packed up our bags to move back over to the UK in spring of 2024 and have been here ever since.
How did living abroad change your perspective on the American hustle culture and your definition of success?
Yeah, it absolutely redefined it. I think I was coming from a career path in medicine, which is essentially defined by the American hustle culture. It was all that I had known from a very, very young age, even before I had decided to attend medical school. You put your head down, you work hard, lots of sacrifices, etc. I don't regret that because I think it's ingrained in me a work ethic and an ambitious approach that I still draw from today in my professional career. But it absolutely led to periods of burnout. I think the biggest thing I learned after moving abroad was that the American hustle culture doesn't have to be the norm everywhere. And it isn't in many places. It became evident to me that I was a much happier, better version of myself when I lived in a place that inherently and structurally supported that kind of life, rather than feeling like I had to swim upstream by myself to even try to have any semblance of balance. Over the past couple of years, I've made the biggest strides in my professional career when I stepped away from that hustle culture that was ingrained in me. And I don't really think that's a coincidence. In terms of success, in my definition of it, that's also definitely shifted from a much more externally driven definition, often given by society, like a certain income level, a job title, climbing the corporate ladder, things that many people are taught from a young age to prioritize. And it became a completely internal process of finding what lights me up and going out and making that happen. For me, in addition to a thriving professional career, it is also a thriving personal life, a strong relationship with my husband and a robust community of friends and loved ones, taking care of my body, running, meditation, pretty much just practicing what I also preach in terms of health. Right now, success to me, growing in my career while feeling happy in my personal life, is exactly what I'm after, and luckily what I've been able to take steps to achieve.
You've written about your worldview shifting while living in Scotland. What were some of the most unexpected ways Scotland influenced your daily life?
When we first moved abroad, I wasn't thinking as much about my daily life and more about the broader things that I'd get to experience. So traveling through Europe, meeting new people, that kind of thing. But I began to walk everywhere pretty much every day. And Edinburgh is luckily such a fantastic and walkable city. But that was definitely a change to my daily life, where back in the States, I was used to driving pretty much everywhere. For example, rather than picking up groceries once a week and loading up the car, we now go every day or every few days. Produce is really fresh here. Food has less preservatives, so it does expire quickly. Partially it's out of choice, partially it's out of necessity. And we don't have or really need a car here, so we are pretty much limited to what we can carry in the bags that we have on us. I also live quite seasonally now, and many people don't know that Scotland is located at a comparable latitude to northern Canada. And so the winters here are very dark, and the summers have a lot of that midnight sun energy. In the wintertime, we all move a bit slower, sleep more, stay in more, kind of treat it as a period of resting up for the season. And then on the flip side, in the summertime, the city just comes alive all day, all night. It's beautiful and it's so, so much fun. I think I definitely live more aligned with the seasons and see that reflected in my daily life, which was unexpected, but I absolutely love it now.
Before moving, you were on a medical career track, as you had mentioned. What led you to change direction and pursue writing and food policy instead?
It was a combination of a lot of things, but I think it mainly centered around two. First, I would say I figured out that I wanted to prevent disease rather than treat it. And that's what I was really passionate about. I didn't want to be another cog in the healthcare machine or speed through 15-minute primary care appointments where I would be prescribing medications to patients who wanted or needed quick fixes. Rather, I was really passionate and wanted to more deeply understand why people were struggling, why people were sick, what they needed to help them live healthier lives, and then go out and play, hopefully, instrumental role in making that happen on a broader scale. That led me to more work in public health and trying to approach medicine from, again, that broader lens and context. And then from there, it was a bit of a trickle down. So through various work experiences, conversations with other people in the field, and also my personal interests as well, I started to focus on nutrition and food policy as my areas of expertise. And the other thing that led me to change directions was also asking myself, where in the world did I want to build my future life? Because I think a side effect from the first 2 years abroad was realizing that I wanted to continue living abroad and that it really didn't make sense to spend a decade in training, become certified in the US, just to turn around and leave again. And so a PhD for me is much more flexible in terms of allowing me to work anywhere around the world. And it also aligned with my career interests and opportunities in the future too. My writing career, on the other hand, was much more unexpected because I had done some work in the past in editing, but I had never had any formal journalism training. I truly have just always loved storytelling and writing. At the start of 2025, a little over a year ago, I just decided that I would take it more seriously and start pursuing it as a passion project on the side and put no expectations on it. Looking back, I think I attribute a lot of my writing success to just being bold in my approach and believing in my abilities, because I really only sent pitches out to top publications. I quickly learned and adapted to the feedback I was getting. I networked like crazy, and I just had this unshakable belief in myself that if I wanted it to work, it would. Once the first piece was published in a pretty large global publication, it just snowballed from there. Now I just feel really lucky to write as much as I get to, and especially for publications that I could have only dreamed of writing for. I've gotten to befriend some amazing people and have experiences I never would have had the chance to if I didn't just shoot my shot last year.
How did living internationally help you reevaluate your relationship with work, time, and well-being?
Yeah, it definitely completely reevaluated it. I think there's so much more to life than work. And it might be a cliche saying, but it's really true. Because when I first moved abroad, I began to see so much of the world and interact with so many different people, vastly different from myself. And that was the first time I really thought, it doesn't have to be this way. in reference to whatever I was accustomed to from the States. And then coupled with when I started working over here, work, time off, well-being, they're all viewed quite differently. And again, I can only speak to my personal experience, but it was very common to take a month off for the winter holidays, a month off in the summer. No one really bats an eye when you sign off at 4 or 5 p.m. There's never any expectation to respond to emails or do any work out of hours. And I've noticed there's a heavier emphasis on mental and physical health, whether that's walking to work, taking that time off, social bonding events, etc. Maybe that does have a bit to do with the field that I'm in, but all of it really taught me to see work through a vastly different lens. Again, all of this isn't to say that I don't prioritize building a successful career or one that I'm proud of, because it's absolutely still a priority of mine. But I think it's being able to put things into perspective a bit more and being able to put down your work, to take that holiday with my loved ones, to say yes to social plans, to prioritize exercise and rest, because I think work will never end and it will always be there, but it doesn't mean that you have to.
What do you find most challenging about combining academic research, journalism, and storytelling? And what projects are you most excited about right now?
The thing I find most challenging is that I never seem to have as much time as I want to for everything. It's really challenging to give your all equally to everything when you're building a portfolio career and juggling these multiple working obligations rather than a traditional 9 to 5, where you can leave work at work, come home, that's that. Also, constantly context switching depending on if I'm putting on my creative hat to write or if I'm sitting in food policy meetings. But I am grateful to have a hand in both the industry side of things as well as my creative pursuits, because I feel really fulfilled by both right now in different ways. And in terms of projects I'm excited about, I am really looking forward to publishing more, hopefully in print this year, as well as expanding my media portfolio through podcasts like this, visual media, social media, etc. Because I really do love writing these short form digital pieces. That's how I started, and we live in such a digital age. It's a special thrill seeing your words in print and tangibly going to the store, buying a magazine that you're in. And yeah, it's a really special feeling. I've also felt the itch in storytelling to delve a bit deeper through longer form content, as I feel like there's only so much you can share in a 1,000-word article. Ultimately, I'm just excited to expand and go a bit deeper this year.
And for anyone who is listening who may feel stuck in a career path, what advice would you offer them about pivoting to something more aligned with their values?
I think first, coming to terms with the fact that you might want to make a change, because it's really hard to confront that internally, especially if you've been in the career for many years, or if you're building towards something like a promotion, or feel trapped in the golden handcuffs, if you will. And I found that part personally really tough, emotionally, especially when I was deciding to leave medical school. But once you get over that hump, it's easier to lean into the practicalities of how to best pivot. And that's where a lot of self-reflection, talking to other mentors or loved ones, and really critically thinking about what hasn't been serving you in this career and what you want to prioritize in the next really come into play. And I think that's such a key step, so you're not blindly jumping into the next career path without deeply knowing why or what you're looking to get out of it. There's a Mary Oliver quote, she's one of my favorite poets that I've had on my desk for many years, that says, "Tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And I think that pretty aptly sums up the core of it all, that you only get this one wild and precious life. And so how do you want to spend it?
What has been the biggest cultural adjustment for you living in the UK?
When I first moved over here at the beginning, it was definitely the vernacular and the different naming of things. And I remember buying groceries for the first time, and I was struggling to find most of the ingredients because they weren't called the same names as what I was used to and what I was searching for. But once I got over that hump of just adjusting, now more of my friends grew up in the UK. And so I would say the biggest cultural adjustment is not really understanding cultural references from them growing up or key moments in British culture that weren't mainstream across the pond. I find it's a lot of me Googling under the table what they're saying.
And you've written about food best of cities. How do local food cultures shape your own sense of belonging abroad?
Local food cultures definitely shape my own sense of belonging abroad because everywhere I travel, food is always planned to be at the heart of my trip. Because I think you can learn so much about a place and its people through its cuisine. And as a writer, I always view food also as a form of storytelling in a sense, and this bridge of connection that can bring people together across the table. Even if I've never been to this country or met this individual before, through their food, they are offering me this window into their heritage and cultural traditions, many of which I might not have even discovered on my own. I think food has that universal language of hospitality and a rooted sense of identity that, for me, no matter where I might find myself in the world, it always brings me back to that.
And how do you approach identity, both as an American and as a global citizen?
That's something that I think I've definitely struggled with over the past 5 years or so because I don't feel connected to the US in the same way that I used to. And of course, I'm also not Scottish. Learning how to grapple with choosing to leave your birth country and also planning to not return, but also reveling in this joy of now identifying as a global citizen and living abroad, it can be really, really challenging and nuanced. I think approaching identity now, I try to approach it in the framing of I get this privilege to choose which parts of what places and stages of my life that I get to hold on to and which I choose to let go of. And there will always be parts of being American I'm proud of and that make me who I am, and parts that I am not proud of and that I choose to let go of. And so my identity now is just this amalgamation of all of these places I've lived and versions of myself that I've been, which requires a lot of intentional self reflection. I think it's helped me settle into my personal identity as well as that of a global citizen. And that change can be really healthy.
Was there a moment or experience when you realized you were no longer the same person who left the US?
Absolutely. Many, many moments. I think the first one was about 9 months after moving abroad when I returned to the US for the first time. And I was very overwhelmed by many things that used to be so normal to me, like massive grocery stores and driving everywhere, more small talk than I was used to. But I think moments that solidified it for me really had to do with relationships with people back in the US. And I do have many friends and people I love from the States that I talk to all of the time. But there have also been many moments and conversations with others that I find harder to connect in the same ways that I used to, where they don't fully understand this new life for me now. And I have a much different perspective and worldview than I used to. But I think that's okay. And it's a really normal part of the growth journey.
Looking back, what would you tell your pre-move self about the experience of living abroad?
It will change every part of who you are, your relationships, your beliefs, your career, your goals for the future, absolutely everything. And that's okay. It should. And I would just tell myself to let the change happen and let yourself grow and don't be afraid to try and fail and change and start over again and again and again.
What's the number one thing you wish every American knew before moving to Europe?
I would say to plan ahead because a lot of people, understandably so, see these highlight reels and travels, which are an absolutely amazing part of getting to live abroad. But there's also so much logistical planning behind the scenes, like sorting out visas, saving money, as it can be quite expensive to move abroad, selling your home, getting a new job, things like that. And also not just tangible planning, but thinking through emotional planning as well. So, how will you maintain relationships with your loved ones overseas with time zone differences? How will you cope with waves of homesickness? Because they will absolutely come, things like that. So, we started planning about a year in advance, but I even know people that started earlier than that. So, I would say plan ahead would be my number one thing I wish every American knew before moving to Europe.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
If you have any inkling of a desire to move abroad, do it. And especially if you're scared to. It could be for a few months, it could be for a year, a lifetime, whatever amount of time. But living abroad is so very different than traveling abroad in all of the best ways. And it will open up your eyes and teach you so much and shape your global identity through the people you meet and the experiences you have. And I'm a much better person because of it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely chatting with you.
The content of ACA podcasts, including documents and presentations, is made available only for general information purposes. It is not intended and should not be treated as legal, financial, or tax advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of American Citizens Abroad, Inc., or any affiliated organization. ACA does not warrant the accuracy, completeness, or usefulness of any content or other information. ACA disclaims all liability and responsibility arising from any reliance placed on any content or information by you or any other person. ACA is nonpartisan and does not support any political party or candidate.